Best Appalachian Bluegrass Banjo Players.
Woo!
That's a powerful list.
I have to give a nod here to both my mom and my dad, who really, I didn't want to just read you a Wikipedia article or a regular old bio on these folks. I asked my dad for the inside scoop on them. So
this is
Marc
news to
Pruett,
me. All right.
yeah, Marc
excited.
Pruett has given backstage, never before heard stories for this list. So buckle the fuck up. I want to just address the elephant in the room. I have to do it. I'm getting in my position of ready to get into this.
I thought you were moving out of the way of the elephant.
No, yes, yeah.
Making room here, sir. Come on in.
Right. So the elephant in the room is that my dad is not on this list. And I have to tell you the reason that he's not on this list. And it is one word. It is nepotism. And if we are anything on this show, it's principled. He really should be. And I am going to tell you about some of the things that he's done just right at the top, because I am so proud of him. He is one of the best ever to come out of Appalachia. You would be shocked at how many banjo players that you know and love that are not from Appalachia. But my dad is really one of the best ones ever to come out of the mountains. He was even included in Earl Scruggs' own book called Master of the Five-String Banjo.
Shit.
He has played on industry standards such as Little Maggie, Think of What You've Done, and I Hope You Learned on Bluegrass Rules, which is a Grammy Award-winning album. He was on Rhonda Vincent's first album, known for, she's an absolute superstar, but that album is known for the Lonesome Wind Blues and other great songs. He was on 1978 Sweet Temptation with Ricky Skaggs that features Little Cabin Home on the Hill with Emmylou Harris and Dolly fucking Parton. And even more greats like Jerry Douglas. He's played with Flatt & Scruggs, Jimmy Martin, Ricky Skaggs, James Monroe, and one of the top bluegrass bands still in rotation today, Balsam Range, which are known for #1 songs like Last Train to Hit Kitty Hawk. And if you want to look at my dad's some of his best work, look at Chain Gang Blues and Marching Home. He's known for his thumb-heavy power picking and for his creative kickoffs and the flair that he puts into the banjo. Truly, he should be on this list, but he's not, because I made the list. Womp womp. So
who's up first?
I have 7 folks for you. So number 7 on this list is a very kind of not well known by name, but extremely influential man named Joe Medford. Joe was one of the early pioneers of bluegrass three-finger style banjo, and he was a contemporary of Earl Scruggs. You're going to hear Earl Scruggs' name a lot in this list, so just expect him to be on it. We'll get to him. But he was a contemporary of Earl, so started back in the 1940s. Joe was actually from Clyde, North Carolina, and was the first banjo player to record with Mac Wiseman, who really was part of the major, top 4 people to put bluegrass into the mainstream. He performed with the Murphy brothers first, though, and Sonny Osborne told my dad one time that when you heard Joe play in 1951 that you couldn't tell him apart from Earl Scruggs. My dad first heard him at the Ramp Convention, obviously, in 1983.
Ramps as in Wild Onions?
Literally Wild Onions.
They're organized enough to have their own convention? That's incredible.
Yeah. So at the Ramp Convention in North Carolina in 1983, and heard him with a friend of his and thought that he sounded just like Earl Scruggs. So this guy is really flying under the radar, but he, alongside Earl Scruggs, kind of helped to develop what is known today as bluegrass style banjo playing.
Damn.
Yes.
Great stuff. Love that. I had never heard of Joe Medford before this, but I'm excited to look him up.
Many people will have not heard of him, I think. I'm really looking forward to the Bluegrass Junkies, what they're going to say about this list. Because
Grassies, as they're called.
Let's go to number 6. I think we're just gonna get even more high caliber. So number 6 is
high caliber.
Oh, I like it. So number 6 is Walter Hensley. The most notable thing about him is that he gained a national spotlight briefly. He was a bright star that burned very briefly at a brief moment in time, but it was the right moment in time. And he cut one record in 1964 with Capitol Records, and it was called The 5-String Banjo Today. And during that time, Flatt & Scruggs...
Not the best album name, in my opinion, but...
Not great. But during that time, Flatt and Scruggs they'd been on national TV for 8 years, and folk music was buzzing. They were being featured in tons and tons of TV shows and news shows and radio shows. And they were everywhere. And so like folk music was really having a renaissance in that time. And so the label Capitol Records, which is still around today, they wanted to cash in on the popularity of the banjo. And they wanted to reap the rewards of cashing in on it. So they did a nationwide search for someone who was amazing but was not well known, and they found Walter Hensley. He was just 17 years old when he recorded that record, and it was a massive hit for Capitol Records. The record itself influenced an entire generation of bluegrass pickers, like including my dad and all of his contemporaries. My dad says that that's one of the main records that inspired him and to help him kind of learn about what his identity with the banjo was. And so that was really Walter's only brush with fame, but it did put him out there for decades, and the like big pickers of that era know who he is and were big time like followers and disciples of him.
Are there any Marc Pruett fast facts in that?
Not anything other than it was part of what inspired him to play the banjo. So
inspired your dad?
Yeah, to play. So when in 1964, my dad was 13 years old, and he had gotten his first banjo as a gift when he was 11. So he was 2 years deep into playing the banjo, and so this was like right when he was starting to go from learning it as like a, here is the precise things to do, and start. That was when he started making his own kind of impression of it and his own style.
Walter Hensley playing the banjo and inspiring your dad when he got his banjo at 10 is like the accordion salesman coming to Weird Al Yankovic's door and selling him an accordion, thus created the greatest parody musician of all time.
Yep.
Okay, that's better than the Motley Crue
That's
reference,
Walter
I guess.
Hensley. Number 5.
Number
You're
5.
ready to go here.
Yes.
Number
let's do
5 is just the most kick-ass of women, Kristen Scott Benson. So she is she's a contemporary of my dad's today. Like, she's younger than my dad, but she is still playing out there today. She's amazing. But the way that she got started was that her grandfather named Hogan was one of he was the banjo player in the band WBT Briarhoppers. Don't ask me what the WBT stands for. I have no idea.
I think it stands for Wow, Big Turtles.
Yeah, okay, we'll go with that. But they were, at the time, like when he was playing, they were a really big band in North Carolina. And Hogan encouraged his granddaughter, Kristen, to learn the banjo. She is incredible. She's most famous with her work with the Grascals, which I think is just one of the best band names ever.
Phenomenal name.
Just so good. Having won with them twice IBMA Entertainer of the Year, which is the International Bluegrass Music Association. Big awards. She's also a 5-time IBMA Banjo Player of the Year, and she's the recipient of 2018's Steve Martin Prize for Excellence in Banjo and Bluegrass. So here's the Marc Pruett tidbit here. She and my dad are very good friends. And actually, he was like, "Do you want to talk to her for this? I'll just give you her number if you want."
Shit.
And I was like, "No, I don't want to bother her with this." But she
Marc
told
Pruett,
my
always
dad,
the giving guy.
I know. So she told my dad that when she was a little kid first learning to play the banjo, that someone told her parents, you have to take Kristen to see this guy in Asheville. And her parents would take her to Bill Stanley's barbecue to watch none other than my dad play shows at Bill Stanley's barbecue in Asheville, North Carolina.
He's making this nepotism thing real hard.
I know.
Also, I lightly Googled, and I believe that WBT was the call signal or whatever it's called for the radio station in North Carolina that they first played on. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. I just found one article while you were talking while I was listening, but it was based out of Charlotte, I believe.
Nice. I love that. Number 4 on our list is Sonny Osborne. So everybody in the room, everybody listening to this podcast knows a Sonny Osborne song, and that song is Rocky Top. Great vocalist, great banjo player. He's from Hayden, Kentucky, and he grew up in a really musical family. By the time that Sonny was 13 years old, he auditioned and got a job with Bill Monroe, who is, if you don't know who Bill Monroe is, he's the father of bluegrass music. So he didn't play the banjo, though. He played the mandolin. So this guy was touring with the #1 bluegrass guy in history at the age of 13.
Damn.
Bill recorded with Sonny. One of the first things they did, they recorded something called the Pike County Breakdown. And Sonny, actually, this is a tidbit from my dad. Sonny went to Bill and said, I actually think that Flatt and Scruggs already recorded that one. And Bill, who was known to be like a bit of a character, said, I don't care. We're going to do it better.
I love that confidence. Love it. That's the confidence of a man who recorded Rocky Top.
Yeah. Incredible. So after he finished up his stint with Bill Monroe, he and his brother started a band. So his brother, the reason that they didn't start out just together was his brother was in the military and he was in the Korean War. So they joined Jimmy Martin, and after he got back, and then broke out to become the legendary Osborne Brothers, that's the band that recorded Rocky Top. So his style was basically second generation Earl Scruggs player. Sonny developed this very bluesy style. He used a lot of bluesy chords and things and runs that made his playing and his style very unique. I will note that there are a lot of pickers on here, most of which are power pickers. So people who play with a lot of strength and who play with a lot of force. My dad being one of those people. But Sonny, not to his detriment, but to his own style, was not necessarily a power picker. He really had a more kind of gentle, very purposeful style.
That's super interesting. See, I didn't know anything about any of this, and I'm learning this all in real time along with you, the listener, so I love this. Very fascinating, interesting guy. Love the Rocky Top connection. Also interesting that he's from Kentucky, so fun fact for all you Balls fans there.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's move on to this the last 3 big heavy hitters.
Yeah, the last 3, if you listen to bluegrass at all, you will know these people. They are, I would say, the big 3 banjo players. They're really just the most influential people. So number 3 is Ralph Stanley. So Ralph Stanley was from the Clinch Mountains in southwestern Virginia, and he grew up in a musical family, and his mother played the clawhammer banjo, which gave Ralph this really interesting. He was one of the first to play both styles really well. So I did not include clawhammer. This is why we said it's the best Appalachian bluegrass style, because it would be impossible to compare the two. But he did play, and it gave him this really interesting take and a lot of character. But his mom was the one who played the clawhammer banjo. He sang in church, and he and his brother Carter began performing as the Stanley Brothers when they were still teenagers in the mid-1940s. They played literally wherever they could. They played schools and churches and community centers and festivals, and anywhere where they could get out there, they were out there. They were also prolific in the recording studio. They recorded in their tenure over 100 albums, which is just, how do you even do that?
That's like one every 3.5 days.
It's crazy.
A year. That's wild. That's just, it's so much music.
It's so
much music.
Yeah. And it was all just like, it flowed from them. That's something, I mean, they are really, really known for this. So in the early days, they did a lot of cover songs, which is a very normal in bluegrass music. Everybody does their own version of songs. You know, like my dad is on kind of the standard recording of Little Maggie, but Billy Strings just recorded Little Maggie a couple of years ago in a totally different way and gave it his own flair. That's just kind of because it's an oral tradition and it's a cultural tradition. Bluegrass is more than just writing your own songs and putting out unique things. It's about contributing to what is already out there and the catalog of songs and watching it develop over time. It's one of the really cool things about bluegrass music. So you guys are going to love this because this is a Marc Pruett tidbit.
Ooh.
So because they were doing a ton of covers, Lester Flatt and Carter Stanley, which was Ralph Stanley's brother, got into an altercation in Bristol, Tennessee, because Lester was upset that Carter and Ralph were quote unquote stealing songs. Ralph later said that the reason that they have all of these amazing Carter Stanley penned songs was because of that altercation. That Carter said after Lester, you know, I don't know if it got physical or what, but after he dressed him down, he said to Ralph, "I'll never play another Flatt and Scruggs song." So wild.
My only comment here is that I just really appreciate that all this went down in Bristol,
right?
Tennessee. Or was it Bristol, Tennessee?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a perfect place for an altercation because the city is split among two states. There's Bristol, Tennessee, and Bristol, Virginia.
Yep.
It's almost like two states competing for one place. And so that's such a great place to have a fight.
Amazing.
I hope they did it on the state line. I hope they did.
It would be so good. So,
Great
when
music
we
video
talk,
idea.
oh yeah, when we talk about the style that Ralph played, we think a lot about Earl leading. We talked about this in a previous episode. If you want to go back and listen to kind of how three finger style is done, go back and listen to our other bluegrass episode. But Earl Scruggs really led with his thumb. And when you're playing the banjo, you play with 3 fingers, and it's thumb, index, middle is the forward roll. There are 2 other rolls, but that's kind of the most common one. But Ralph's style led with his index finger, which gave him a real kind of flavor that was very different than Earl Scruggs. And a lot of people, I'm not saying I agree with this, but I do think it's notable that a lot of people would say that that meant that he was a tad more limited in his style than Scruggs was, but it had that kind of driving bluegrass sound that we all know and love still, but it just had a different flair. And that was what was different about Ralph. He also played, this is really interesting, and I did not know this until my dad and I had this conversation. Ralph played a raised head banjo, and that has a lot more treble than a flat head banjo, which is what Scruggs played. So when you listen to Ralph Stanley and the Stanley brothers in their recordings, there's an almost tinny like a tin can, like a tinny vibe to the banjo that some people really love, some people really hate it, but that comes from the raised head banjo. And a flat head banjo is literally what it says. It's 11 inches and it's flat and it has a lot more of that bass and the tonal difference you can really hear. So last little tidbit on Ralph Stanley. These last three have so many stories and are so rich in history that this one they're just a little bit longer. Sorry.
Okay.
Earl Scruggs once told my dad while in a car on the way to the recording studio with Ricky Skaggs. So it was Earl Scruggs. Yeah, it was Earl Scruggs, my dad, and Ricky Skaggs in a car. This was in 1982. That Carter Stanley asked him to go. Asked Earl to go out on a weekend with the Stanley brothers to show Ralph what he did on the banjo, and that's when Ralph changed his style from 2-finger to 3-finger. So technically, even though he played it differently than Earl, he learned the method from Earl Scruggs.
Shit. This is just like, this is the only way you can get this information is by listening to the show, first of all. I love these tidbits. I love that this community is so small and they're so great. And I'm excited about the top two here. And,
top two.
These ones will be very familiar. In fact, we named an episode after one of these, the next one.
Yep. So number 2 is J.D. Crowe. Cannot even talk about the bluegrass banjo without talking about J.D. Crowe. What a guy, just an absolute fucking legend. J.D. was from Lexington, and I am counting that because, you know, everybody has different definitions of what Appalachia is and was at the time, and I'm counting it. So J.D. was from Lexington. Yeah, close enough. And when he was 13 years old, Flatt and Scruggs came to Lexington and they were performing weekly shows. So at that time, it was like kind of a thing to do, to go to a town, hang out in that town, record at the local radio station, do a few shows. That was just easier because you had a population center there and you had venues and you had enough, you know, radio to get out there. So they'd camp out for a few weeks. And there's this really wonderful photograph that was kind of lost to time until recently of this giant audience watching Flatt and Scruggs play, and this 13-year-old kid with his hands under his chin watching Earl Scruggs play. And so it was just like this kid was in rapture of this music and of this style from day one. And so his dad, because he was committed to helping JD get out there, it would take him to the local radio station where Flatt and Scruggs would play all the time during those weeks. And Scruggs kind of became his mentor, which is kind of a bonkers thing that happened, but it happened. So JD's big break was with Jimmy Martin, and he recorded the definitive version of Train 45 with Jimmy Martin. And his style was certainly Scruggs inspired, but it was different enough that it gave him a signature. He is one of the power pickers, and he had a lot of flair. The man just exuded showmanship when it came to making his music something that was something to behold. Like J.D. Crowe put his heart and soul into his music, and because he was not limited by something he could invent like Scruggs was, he could go further. Basically, he was standing on their shoulders and became just this creative genius. So he is now this indelible figure in bluegrass music, a monster legend. And he was with Jimmy Martin for 5 years, and during that time recorded seminal works. But the one that I always like is Honey, You Don't Know My Mind, which is an incredible song. And Jimmy Martin, there's no character in bluegrass music like Jimmy Martin, and he's just chef's kiss amazing. So after he left Jimmy Martin, he became a band leader multiple times, but his biggest band, and listen to this lineup, was in 1975 with J.D. Crowe and the New South, with people like Tony Rice, Ricky Skaggs, Jerry Douglas, and Bobby Sloan, a lineup never before and never since seen. So that's like the biggest, most famous conglomerate of musicians, maybe only rivaled by the Bluegrass Album Band, which was a lot of those same players. But like as a touring band, that's like unbelievable.
Damn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number one is the heaviest of hitters.
Yeah.
A name that is ingrained in not only bluegrass music history, but just music history in general.
Yep. An incredible banjo player, incredible person. Earl Scruggs had to be number one. Couldn't be anybody else. The man needs no introduction. After
None.
you have heard how much he's influenced this music through every single one of the last 6 that I have mentioned, it's hard to give you any more than that. So everyone knows Earl. Everyone loves what he did for bluegrass music. He's from Shelby, North Carolina, which is just outside of Appalachia, but we claim him as our own.
Hell yeah.
And he played with a lot of local groups from when he was young, did some stuff with his brothers. But here's what I don't think that people know. And this is, I told my dad, I was like, we've talked about Earl Scruggs before. I need the inside scoop. So everything else is like very insider baseball it's just awesome that we have the ability to pull out this much depth and richness. So one of the first big exposures for Earl Scruggs, he had on WWNC radio, which is a station out of Asheville. And he blew people away. People absolutely loved him.
Did you say it was called WNC or
WWNC?
Checks out. All right.
Yeah. Solid name for a radio station. So my dad remembers reading like a newspaper story at the time where Earl, because he was not big yet at all, he said that he had to put as much oil in his car to get there as gasoline just from Shelby to Asheville. So
hilarious.
Even the greats have to work their way up. So after that, Earl played in a band with a man called Lost John Miller, which I think is just an insanely good bluegrass name. And it was there that a fiddle player was who kind of scouted him. A man named Jim Shoemate from Hickory, North Carolina, heard him play with Lost John Miller. And Jim was kind of a big time fiddle player in North Carolina at the time. And he took Earl to the Grand Ole Opry for his very first audition with Bill Monroe. And the rest is history. Dear Old Dixie was his audition song, which is a great instrumental. And Bill didn't comment much at the time, but on Earl's picking, but he auditioned on a Saturday and Bill hired him on the next Monday. So he did not have too hard of a time picking Earl Scruggs out of the crowd. So Earl is just the most amazing banjo player in the history of bluegrass music. My favorite other than my dad, and just like an all-around amazing person. I had the opportunity to meet him several times, and he was nothing but lovely. And yeah, the man is just an absolute monster legend.
Wow. The fact that you not only have this personal knowledge, like that you have like this institution of knowledge that is your dad and your parents in general, but the fact that you've had the opportunity to meet a lot of these people and have personal experiences with them firsthand is incredible and is something that can't be replaced or replicated. So I think I speak for everybody on this show, or everybody listening to this show, that we are incredibly grateful for your knowledge base, your expertise, and your passion, because it definitely came through.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love doing these bluegrass lists. Let us know if you want more, because I'll do fiddle players. I'll do guitar players. I mean, number one on guitar players is going to be Tony Rice. Sorry, I'm just going to spoil that right now.